Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Playbook for Leaders and Entrepreneurs. Today's conversation might be life changing for some of you guys because we have a phenomenal guest, Tara Kermiet. Tara is a burnout prevention and leadership coach who helps high performers, high achievers build burnout resistant careers and businesses without sacrificing their well being. As a former burnout survivor herself, Tara knows firsthand what it takes to break free from cycles of exhaustion and create a life of balance, confidence, and success. She is here today to share her powerful insights on preventing burnout, setting boundaries, and stepping into what she calls a balanced, badass mindset. Tara, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your incredible playbook for success with us. I'm really excited to deep dive into a conversation with you.
Absolutely, Sid. It's so awesome to be here. And let me just say that intro was amazing. So I'm for sure going to record that. And just anytime I'm feeling down, I'm going to listen to it on a regular basis. But thanks so
Thank you
much for
so much.
having me.
Love it. Thank you. So let's start with the icebreaker, Tara. So, what fires you up today to take this day by storm?
Yeah. So I was telling you a little bit earlier, I have been up since 4:30. I have been going strong today. And a lot of that is because I had the chance to meet with several organizations today to talk about how we're going to tackle burnout and create a burnout resistant workplace for them. And that is what gets me excited. That's why I do what I do. So that is really what's jazzing me up. But also the weather in general is
Hmm.
beautiful here. I'm based out of North Carolina in the United States, and it's sunny. It is warm. And right after we wrap up this conversation, I'm going to be hopping in my hammock for a little while to read.
Amazing. I love that. Way better than the Manchester weather here, but yeah. So, Tara, please could you give us more insights into your business and personal life so our listeners can get to know you a little bit more?
Yeah. So I have a background in higher education.
Hmm.
Specifically, I worked at universities within the United States to help build the leadership skills of the students within the colleges and universities. And so my passion is leadership development. I love reading about it. I'm a nerd 100% through and through. I
Same here.
listen to podcasts all the time. Leadership is just my jam. So
Hmm.
I really wanted to translate that experience into the corporate setting. So I do have some corporate experience as well. I worked for an organization that was centered around leadership development, leadership training. And I had the awesome privilege of being able to serve as an instructional designer there. So that really meant that I got to educate and learn how to develop online systems that work. Um, but with that came my own burnout experience. And I've had, like you mentioned, I've had several experiences of burnout. I have been a high achiever since probably I came out of the womb, I'm sure. I'm an only child. And so that usually means that, at least for me, I was like it for my parents. So I thrived on the gold stars. I really wanted to do everything organization wise when I was in school. I
Hmm.
wanted to be perfect at everything, do all the right activities, be friends with all the right people. And with that comes pressure and, stress and all those lovely things that we experience. And I started to develop like a perfectionist tendency. I tend to overcommit to things and I feel like I can do pretty much all the things all the time when in reality, I can't. And so I have really established my business around being the complete opposite of that. And I want to be the person that I needed when I was going through challenging times. And I also want to be the person that the
Hmm.
organization that I was working for needed at that time, too. Because I think that when I approach burnout and leadership development, it's not just an individual experience, it is a systemic issue. And it is something that I really think businesses need to be in tune with, and we need to approach and tackle the issue from all sides. Take a 360-degree kind of approach to really
Hmm.
make a meaningful difference in people's lives. So my business, I do one-on-one individual coaching with people specifically going through burnout, or let's say they're maybe feeling a little stress or some tension with the work that they're doing. And they're just looking for kind of, what do I want my next step to be? Do I want to stay in this position? Do I want to go? I help people through that kind of conversation too, through different career transitions. And then I also have the corporate side where I do workshops, training, and consulting for organizations that really do want to create people-centered cultures that focus on the well-being of their employees. So that way they can maximize their profits and their outputs to the best of their ability by focusing on the wellness of their people.
Wow, amazing. Amazing, Tara. What's your story? How did you get into burnout prevention specifically?
Yeah, I got into it. I fell into it, I think, is probably a lot of people would probably say. And, I mentioned this earlier, like I want to be the person that I needed when I was going through burnout myself. So my most recent experience with burnout was probably my most serious in that I had a lot of health and physical responses to burnout. I didn't recognize a lot of the signs that my body was giving me early. And it kind of waited until my body was like screaming at me and shutting down. And even then, I wasn't acting on it. I felt stuck, like I needed to be in that company. I needed to be doing that job. I had started looking for other jobs and applied to like over 100 jobs and couldn't find anything. I think I got 2 interviews and didn't get anything out of that. And when you're already in a place of feeling like you're a failure, that you are losing confidence in your own professional ability, to then also be putting yourself out there and getting rejection after rejection, or just like ghosting and not hearing from anybody at all, that only takes you deeper into that pit of despair, essentially.
100%.
So I was having physical responses. I get migraines on a pretty regular basis. I have anxiety, but this was like a whole different level. I had at one point a migraine that had gone several weeks straight with no relief. My medication wasn't working. I was having literal panic attacks before Zoom calls with the leadership of my company that I was working for. I was actually getting physically sick before meetings as well. So I was having those visceral, like bodily responses. And I started picking up on it and was talking to my husband about it. My husband works outside of the home. And so he's not here when I was working remotely. So he wasn't here to like see how I was reacting. But I was telling him, and being even the personality that I am, like I was downplaying it. I'm like, I'm just stressed. I'm sure it's just because of some of the changes that we've had. And at one point he was working from home for whatever reason. And I was getting ready to log into a meeting and had a complete meltdown like in my office where it was just uncontrollable crying. Like I didn't know where it was coming from. Who knows? But that's how my body was reacting. And it took him looking at me and seeing me in that state. And he's like, you can't keep doing this. Like, this is breaking you. And that was like the light bulb moment for me that I needed to figure out what's going on. I didn't want to go and jump ship and go to another job that basically I would repeat the same issues. And so I started really doing a lot of research on workplace burnout, on chronic stress, on just like the health responses, the bodily responses. Started looking at how can you address this? How can you really move forward? What's the solution essentially so that I don't have to experience this again? And that's what has evolved into the approach that I take with my coaching and with my consulting now, is taking all of that research and putting it into application that hopefully other people don't have to go through the same experience that I did.
Wow. Thank God you stopped at that time when your
Hmm.
husband came in, for sure. And do you think now, 2025, are we in like a burnout pandemic with all this social media rising, working from home culture? Do you think?
I absolutely do. I know the WHO, the World Health Organization,
Hmm.
does not necessarily identify it as like a disease or anything like that, but it does recognize it as an occupational phenomenon. I am of the opinion that eventually it will be recognized in
Hmm.
a more serious way by health organizations such as the WHO. And I think that because if you break down the word disease, it is a dis-ease. And that is exactly what is happening in your body with burnout. You have physical uneasiness and tension. I
Hmm.
usually use the word like tension or friction, but there's values misalignment. And that's what a lot of the research is centered around: the misalignment between the workplace, the work that you're actually doing, and kind of your own values and what's important to you and your
Hmm.
personality and your strengths. And so that's why I think that we are in a stage where at least more people are having the conversation around it, which
Yeah.
definitely is needed. I do think sometimes things get trendy and it gets watered down a little bit. And
Hmm.
there are ways that you can experience burnout in other capacities. I
Hmm.
focus on workplace burnout simply because that's where a lot of the research is centered around.
Percent.
And I think that that's the most important. And you brought up like a lot of people are working remotely or hybrid. And now we even have, at least here in the United States, a lot of return to office mandates that
Hmm.
are putting people in a really tough position because they've gotten accustomed to these remote jobs. Their lifestyle is centered around working remotely. And if you find value, if your values are in alignment with working remotely and having that flexibility and having that independence and being able
Hmm.
to work when you're at your best, at your peak,
Yeah.
that may not align with the traditional work hours of an office, a brick and mortar office, then there's going to be tension there. And I think the more and more we start to see these kind of mandates come to play, I think that that's going to elevate burnout. I think the political, the social, the cultural environment that we are in, the
Yeah.
tension that's out there is going to also play a role in the tension that we feel internally as well. There are external contexts that
Hmm.
impact how we experience burnout as well. And so I think that the more we can have language around where we're seeing the friction, to know what's causing the issue, to know what's important to us, and to
Yeah.
learn how to set boundaries around that, I think the more we'll be able to build a burnout resistant career, life, and hopefully workplaces. And I do want to say, Sid, like I emphasize burnout resistance versus I try to avoid, sometimes I use this language just because it's more common and
Yeah.
understood among people, but I try to avoid saying like burnout proof or, just eliminating burnout because I want to recognize that burnout's always kind of going to be at your heels.
Yeah.
And you have to learn how to have the tools and the skills and the strategies to be able to maintain resistance to it and not let it penetrate you.
100%. And scary, but that's why we have you here today.
Yeah.
I want to understand burnout more. So, what does it look like being burned out, and what does it not being burned out look like?
Yeah. I think a lot of people, for me, it's easy to start with the not,
Yeah.
what it isn't. So a lot of
Mm-hmm.
people compare burnout to like other mental health diseases, or other mental health concerns. A lot of people may misconstrue depression or anxiety as burnout. Those are very separate medical issues, not burnout. Burnout specifically is related to the workplace. You can have depression and not have burnout. So I think that that's something that's really important. Or you can have anxiety and not experience burnout because your workplace environment is hunky dory, like you're fine.
Yeah.
Burnout is all about what's going on in the tension within your workplace. It stems from multiple things. It looks like kind of three ways. One is the most familiar, and I would say that's exhaustion. However you want to define exhaustion. That's like the physical, I can't get out of bed, I feel drained, I'm just not myself in that manner. That is a pretty common symptom. I would say that that's probably the first thing that people start to notice is when the physical reactions start coming into play. But there's two other facets or kind of symptoms to burnout that research tells us exists and that I have seen time and time again. And that first one is cynicism. So when you start feeling cynical towards the work that you're doing, you find that you're complaining more, you feel kind of some sort of way towards certain people at work or certain activities at work, or you just find that like every time a meeting gets put on your calendar, you sigh even more and more, and you almost have a sense of detachment from the work that you're doing. That's another clear sign. And that usually means that you're starting to get a little deeper into the burnout. And then when you start to also have like depersonalization, or where you're feeling like you don't have any confidence, you're lacking the confidence that you are capable to do the job. You start questioning yourself and your abilities and the role that you play and your capabilities to be able to execute your job. That's another sign of burnout. It really impacts us on such a deep level. It goes so much further than the exhaustion that it is really, I kind of describe it like a storm within yourself. You really start to feel like the thunder rolling, if you picture like a tornado swirling around, that's what your life essentially feels like internally. And sometimes it can also look like that externally, depending on how you express all of these emotions and these feelings. So that's really how I describe burnout. But one thing too that I want to mention is that I always think about it holistically. And I mentioned this earlier, like there are individual pieces to burnout, but there's also systemic things to burnout. So you need to look at what is within the workplace causing your stress and tension, but what is also within yourself. Are there decisions that you're making or actions that you're taking or beliefs that you have that may be fueling the fire, if you will, within the burnout? And that's where taking on prevention and thinking about strategies and what can help you resist that penetration really comes into play. Because when you recognize what's causing it, then you know what to address.
So Tara, what are the subtle signs leaders and entrepreneurs may face before it becomes like a bigger problem?
Yeah, so I had mentioned earlier, like in my experience, it took the extremes for me to realize that I was kind of in that state. When you start noticing that maybe you're forgetting things more easily, I describe it like you're in a fog. Your cognitive abilities maybe just aren't as sharp as they usually are, or you're working slower than you typically produce things. Those could be signs that you're tired, you're exhausted, that your equilibrium, your internal nervous system is a little bit off. If you find that you're getting sick more often, like if you're just catching the common cold pretty regularly, I mean, there could be a number of reasons why that's happening, but that could be a sign. One of my clear signs that I have now noticed is when I start getting more irritable at easy things. Like if traffic, like I don't like traffic. Nobody likes traffic. But if I have like a really strong reaction to traffic, or my poor husband, bless his heart, he usually gets the brunt of my irritability. And so if I snap at him because he left his socks in the living room instead of putting them in the laundry room, like, who really cares if that happens? Does it hurt anybody? No. But if I notice that I'm like getting angry about those kind of things, I now am able to pause and be like, something's not right here, because I'm not normally having that kind of response. So those are
Mm-hmm.
some of the subtle signs, and they can progress, right? They can start to
Yeah.
get more and more strong, and you can start to really notice them. Another thing too that somebody mentioned to me the other day that I hadn't even thought of, if you're like bumping into things more often, if like your literal equilibrium is off a little bit, so like let's say you're a little clumsier than normal,
Mm.
that could be a sign that something's going on within your brain, that like some hormones might be off, like some of the stress hormones may be causing that imbalance a little bit. That's not something I had ever thought of, but it makes sense when you really think about how much
Yeah.
like science kind of goes on and how much your brain really does know what's going on in your body more than your heart
Mm-hmm.
does sometimes.
Yeah, for sure. And very well explained as well, again, with the subtle signs that some of the leaders and entrepreneurs just may not be aware about before it becomes like a bigger problem. And
Mm-hmm.
since we have talked about burnout, now I want to know like how can we be more resistant towards it? So I think one of the YouTube videos I watched, one of your amazing shots that you did. So you had shared on one of that videos that we need these 5 people to have a resistant-proof life. So if you could share some tips on that.
Yeah, absolutely. These are what I call your support squad. So a lot of people talk about your support network, or, sometimes in leadership trainings, they're called the board of directors, whatever you choose. I call it the support squad. And I think this is really important that you choose specific roles for people to play. And those roles are, you have a role model. So this is someone that you don't necessarily even have to know. It can be a celebrity. It could be somebody that you've just seen on YouTube or you listen to their podcast. Like for me, one of my role models is Mel Robbins. Like I love the work that she does. I love how she speaks. I really look to her to see what are ways that I can kind of model the
Mm,
actions that she takes, not because I want to be her, but I admire some characteristics and
yeah.
qualities in her. I don't know Mel Robbins. She's not my friend, but I think it's important to have someone to look up to that has kind of walked the journey that you want to walk and is really an aspirational person, because that gives you inspiration, that gives you something to work towards. And I always talk
Mm-hmm.
about how important it is to be focused on your why and to align a lot of your decisions around your why.
Mm-hmm.
Your role model gives you that why, essentially, and what you're working towards. So it can be somebody that you know as well. And if that's the case, that's even better, because then you can really tap into that person. But it also can just be somebody that you watch on YouTube, listen to their podcast, read their books, whatever. The next person that is probably pretty common, most of us have this type of person, is a mentor. So a mentor is similar to the role model in that they have been where you want to go. But what they're there to do is to help you along the way, to kind of be your guide, to show you what's possible, and to share their lessons that they learned along the way, so that hopefully you don't make those same mistakes and go through those same struggles. So a mentor is that's something we're pretty common. We know, we're pretty familiar with that. The third person that I think is important is to have a coach. Now, this is the person who is probably going to give you a little tough love every once in a while, because we all need it, whether we
Mm-hmm.
like it or not. And the coach is also somebody who's going to really, they're not going to tell you what to do. They're
Mm-hmm.
going to give you tools and strategies for you to figure out what's going to work for you.
Mm-hmm.
And this is how you build resilience, which is going to help you build your burnout resistant life. The more coaches you have, the better, because your coach should be very specific on a specific skill or like a niche problem that you have. Your mentor's more broad scale. your coach really hones in. So if you think about like sports,
Mm-hmm.
you have specific coaches that run specific drills.
Yeah.
That's very similar to like life, what you need in a coach. Then you have your sponsor. This is probably the hardest person to find, if I'm being fully honest. And this is the person that is in rooms that you are not in that will bring up your name. So this is the person that they have connections, they have a strong network, they are going to open doors for you that you wouldn't have access to otherwise. And the reason why this is so important is because we can get so defeated the harder we work, and if we're not seeing the results. And so to know that you have someone that has your back in rooms that you are not in yet, that's huge.
Yeah,
That
for
can be a
sure.
huge like confidence booster. Plus, they're so familiar with your talents, with your skills, your strengths, that they can stay in a room like, Sid's going to be the person for this. And I know this
Yeah.
because XYZ. That gives you so much
Mm-hmm.
power that you don't think you have, but because of that person that gives you access to that power, it can do wonders for you.
Mm-hmm.
And then the last person is a cheerleader. We all need someone, we need that hype person to, when we're feeling down, to pick us up. One of my really close friends, Brenna, she is my hype person. Like anytime I have something important, she's going to be the person that I call right before to like pump me up, get me ready, have me excited. And I've got several folks like that. And I think that that's the important piece too, is that
Mm-hmm.
it's not just 5 people. Like you can't, don't just fill those 5 roles and be like, well, I'm done. Like I've got my team. You want to have multiple people in each role. Now, I would say my recommendation is to avoid having one person serve multiple roles, only because I think it's more helpful if they can be targeted and specific about the support that they're providing you. But you can have multiple people serve in one role.
Mm-hmm.
So that way you have a really robust
Yeah.
support squad. And it may depend on what season of life you're in, what you're going through burnout wise, or just in general in life. You may need more coaches at one time than you do cheerleaders. It may be, I really need a lot of sponsors right now because I'm
Mm-hmm.
in the middle of a job search. So that's where I'm
Yeah.
going to focus my energy. And that's the beauty of having a support squad, is that start thinking about now, who would you put in your lineup essentially, so
Mm-hmm.
that you can call them in and be there for you in a way that is going to be very meaningful, very intentional, and
Mm-hmm.
help you. And also recognize that you're asking them for a favor. So figuring out how you can reciprocate that gift to them too. What role can you play for them?
Mm-hmm. Amazing. I'm pretty sure you're going to be a role model for some of our listeners for sure.
I hope so.
And let's say, for example, I have burnout now. So how should I proceed, or what strategies I could use to recover?
Yeah. So the first thing I always focus on is, let's get you back to equilibrium.
Okay.
So the first thing that I want to do when I'm coaching with folks is I want to know, where are your basic needs kind of off kilter? So are you struggling with sleep? Are you struggling with eating? Or are you hydrated? Like those basic needs. Like, because if your foundation is unsteady, there's no way that you're going to be able to address the bigger issues. Now, another
Correct.
thing, a colleague of mine, she is well known for saying that vacations won't cure your burnout. And I completely agree with her, because you can take time off from something, but when you return, if it's the same repeat
Yeah.
issues, you're just going to need that vacation sooner again. And that's why I also say like self-care, rest, those aren't going to cure your
Mm-hmm.
burnout. But if you don't do them, then you're never going to cure your burnout. So if you've got burnout, your first step is to just get kind of back to equilibrium, get back to kind of your foundation to make sure that that's squared away. Once you have like regulated your nervous system essentially, then you have a clearer mind to be able to really look at the root causes. And I look at the root causes on 5 C's is what I call them. And these are the 5 C's driving burnout. The first C is conditions. So what are the conditions in your workplace that are stressful to you? Pinpointing the stress. It could be anything from crazy workloads to specific policies that just don't align with who you are. To if you're in the office, it could be noise. Maybe you work in kind of an open office setting and that is not the environment that you can thrive in. Like me, I need doors closed, quiet time to be able to focus. Conditions could also be like the people who are at work as well. So if there are culture clashes, if there's conflict on a regular basis, if you can feel the tension, there may be the conditions, the environment may be causing stress. So identifying if there's anything in the conditions that are causing you stress. Then the second C is culture. So looking at the organizational culture. Are there values within the organization that don't really align with your either professional or your personal values? So this could be a culture that just expects you to be on all the time. Like you're just expected to answer your emails anytime it comes in. If you get a DM or a Slack from somebody, anytime you get that ping, you're supposed to respond. It could be a culture too where I just did a recent TikTok video about PTO shaming. So people that take time off, if you're in a culture that shames you essentially for taking time off, or if you're in a culture that does not support you while you're gone, that could be causing stress. So we look at your conditions, your culture, and then we look at the convictions. So these are internal beliefs and values that you have about work that are important to you, or stories and narratives that you have told yourself throughout life. My convictions that have caused me to fuel some burnout have been the people-pleasing nature, my perfectionist tendencies, my overcommitment tendencies, the high achiever, those kind of things. So that is another area that you can explore. Then you want to explore the choices that you're making. Are you setting boundaries? Are you setting boundaries but then not actually holding them? Are you choosing to respond to certain things in certain ways? Have you chosen to contribute to a conflict versus step away from a conflict? All of these kind of things. Are you choosing to take vacation and rest, or are you choosing to work through and not take your PTO? Those choices, as much as we don't like to admit it, we do have a role in as well. And then the last thing that you look at is your capacity. And this is not just your physical capacity, like your physical energy, but looking at your spiritual energy, your emotional, your mental load. All of those play a role in what capacity level you're at. If you are maxed out mentally, physically, emotionally, socially, all of those, like you're going to have burnout. Like it's pretty much inevitable. So we need to understand that. And doing that assessment helps you start to think about your values, which is kind of the next step in the process, is to really hone in on what are your personal values, what are your professional values, which are your personal values are just core to who you are. I call them your anchor values. Your professional values are like how you show up to work, how you want to be seen at work, what's important to you at work. Like for me, professionalism is really important. Integrity is huge for me. I can't work for any kind of company or with anybody that does not have integrity. I also value like efficiency and knowing that those things are rolling and we're doing things the best way we can. And if I'm in a work environment that has processes that are all over the place, that I'm going to struggle. And that's because my values are misaligned. And so that way you can see from your 5 C's, where are my values misalignments? And that's where you can start to address them. And there are layers of addressing it. You have the most control you have is on things that you do, right? You can't always control everything else, but you can control how you respond, how you act, what you do. So we start there. What are things that you can do to change your environment, to change your situation, to address those misalignments? And then we work our way down. We work into your support network. How can you kind of build a support network, your support squad that's going to get you there? Then we look at your role. Are there things in your work or within your job and role specifically that you do have control over that you could tweak to make a better alignment? If not, then we kind of have the conversation, do you stay or do you go? Those are tough conversations to have, but they're necessary sometimes. There are also ways that you can influence your workplace. Are there conversations that you can have with your supervisor about your workload, or just letting them know kind of where you're at? Are there things that you can do, or recommendations or things that you can advocate for at the workplace? And then we look at your context too, because like I mentioned earlier, like society and everything going on still will play a role. So we want to look at, how do you respond to those things? You can't necessarily change what's going on in society, but you can change how you respond. So that was a very long-winded answer. And I just walked you through of basically what 6 sessions of coaching looks like with me in a very short little sprint there.
No, it was amazing. The 5 C's are big key takeaways. And for our listeners, if you want to get in touch with Tara, I'll link or her social medias in the show notes so you can get in touch if you have any burnout issues or anything like that. So, Tara, like, does burnout happen just mentally, or it's physically, or it's both, or vice versa? What do you think?
Yeah. So if you kind of break down those 5 C's, you can see that, to me, in my non-scientific research, because let's be honest, I'm not a scientist. I just did all the culmination of research. But when you break that down, you can see that there are mental pieces to burnout, there are physical components to burnout, and there are environmental and systemic pieces to burnout. So I think that it is mental, it is physical, and it's environmental. And if you think about the symptoms and some of the things that we talked about, that kind of mirrors that as well, because you can have some mental responses and symptoms, you can have physical responses and symptoms, and then the way you're responding to your environment also kind of speak to that as well. So I think that those two things mirror. That's my take on it. I'm sure other people have other opinions, but and for some people it's all three. For some, it may just be really heavily on the mental or really heavily on the physical or whatever, or it may be a combo, and it may be a different situation depending on kind of where you're working, you know.
Quite interesting, and everyone is different, so might suffer differently for sure. And since you mentioned you also suffered from overthinking, perfectionism, and that also leads to burnout, as you said. So what strategies do you use to cope with perfectionism or overthinking?
Yeah. Perfectionism is a lot of mindset work. It's getting comfortable with the process and not the result. So I've had to really change my viewpoint of what success looks like, and recognizing that success for me now is learning through the process, not necessarily what the end result is going to be. And that has been really helpful. And that just takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of, for me, honestly, I've worked with a coach, I've worked with a therapist, and it's something that I'm constantly working on. I still have moments where my little perfectionist, I call myself a recovering perfectionist, because that little piece of me kind of pops up over my shoulder every once in a while and is like, hey, I'm still here. So that's, it's a part of life. I think one of the best activities that has ever helped me in just reflecting on my perfectionist tendencies is to basically go through all of my failures that I've ever had, right? Which is like a perfectionist's biggest fear. Okay. So if you think about it, it's almost like having, what is it, like exposure therapy, I think they call it.
Uh,
So essentially something similar to where you're listing out, you're going through all of the failures that you've ever experienced in your life.
uh,
We're going to forget about all the times that life went perfect. Look at all the failures and take each one and at least pick out like one lesson that you learned from that failure. Doing that on a pretty regular basis has now made it a habit for me that when I am finding myself like beating myself up over something that didn't quite go as I had pictured in my head, I like pause now and I'm like, okay, but what's the lesson in this? How did I learn? And that has helped me really focus on the learning piece and the process versus, like I said, the outcome or the result. And then for overthinking, I will say like overthinking can stem from a lot of things. Perfectionism feeds into overthinking a lot of times because you're, at least for me, like it shows up like I'm constantly rethinking and overplaying conversations that
mm.
I've had. Like, the old me would probably after we would, stop recording, I would probably be
Yeah.
sitting going, oh, I should have said this, or I can't believe I said that, or, all that kind of stuff. Or sometimes too, it's because your brain is so overloaded with information that
Mm,
you're trying to remember that you have a workload that's beyond your capacity. And so you're just constantly thinking about these things. For me, the best thing I do is brain dumping. I
mm,
I don't journal. I am not a journaler. I
mhm.
encourage people, if that's a habit for them, if that's something that works for
Yeah.
them, great. For me, it does not work. But brain dumping is like my version of journaling. I have notebooks almost everywhere. I have a waterproof notepad in my shower so that I can write things down as my brain thinks of them. And what that helps is to clear it out so that I'm not
Mm,
ruminating it. And then I can look at it more objectively. Because to me, once something's down on paper or physically, like in my phone or something that it's not
yeah.
just here in my thoughts, it becomes more objective. It's not so internal to me. So that has helped me with overthinking. It's also like dissecting, like, what are you overthinking about? Where is this
Yeah.
stemming from? Those kind of things can help too. And that's like, I mean, I could do coaching just on perfectionism or overthinking or people pleasing or any of those kind of things, because they are such deep-seated issues that can come from our growing up, our experiences, trauma, what have you. And I don't handle trauma because I am not a therapist. So that's when I would
Mm.
refer.
Yeah, I love it. And I never heard this before, using failures to deal with perfectionism or brain dumping. That's quite new. I love it. And I always use this quote for perfectionism. It's like done is better than perfect. So that kind of keeps me
Yes.
going as well. Amazing. And I want to know more about work-life balance and boundaries. So how do I know what is my limit and how can I really respect it?
Mm. Sometimes we don't learn our limits until they've been tested. But this is another area where values come into play very strongly. So if you start to identify the anchor values that you have, the professional values that you have, and even sometimes like the organizational values that you're looking for within your
Hmm.
company or organization, that gives you almost a line of, obviously those are important to you because they're values. So then you can start to decide, how do you respond if those values have been questioned, those values have been kind of pushed aside, those values have been diminished or squashed or whatever, um, challenged in some way. Values speak to work-life balance so much, especially because you got to think your values, sure, they're pretty core to who you are, but they can change as seasons of life change.
Yeah.
And that's why the way I like picture work-life balance, a lot of people don't like the term work-life balance, right? There's been a lot of controversy around it. And some people, and I've used these terms too, like some people call it work-life integration. work-life harmony. Some people don't like that work comes before life, so then they say life, work, whatever.
That's a good one.
I mean, you see it all over the place, but I picture it if we just had the Olympics, several months now, but
Yeah.
if you watch the balance beam gymnasts, they're up there. Rarely are they ever standing on the balance beam just perfectly still. They're usually moving around, they're wobbling, sometimes they fall off and they get back on. They're changing and shifting their weight and kind of their energy to where they need it to get the balance. And that's how I see work-life balance. It is
Amazing.
you changing your energy, your flow, kind of where you need to focus your weight in that season of life to feel at balance. And only you are going to know what balance feels like to you. I can't tell you what balance looks like to you. You're going to know once you know your values, because you're going to know if you feel the stickiness, the friction, or if you feel light and free and like things are working. You're never going to be able to give energy equally to everything. Like,
For sure.
that's not realistic, right? We're humans. But if you know that you're honoring your energy in a way that's suiting you for the moment and for the season that you're in, then you know that you're in work-life balance or life-work balance or whatever you want to call it. And that's where your boundaries are going to set in too. You may set a boundary related to work, but then later on, you may have to set a boundary related to your family life and how those things work. And another thing that I want to highlight, and this is from a book that I read about boundaries. I think it's by Melissa Urban. If I mispronounce her name, whatever, but I think it's literally called like the Book of Boundaries or something like that. And I can send you the info later, but she explains in this book about boundaries that boundaries are not about what you're putting onto others. Boundaries are how you're responding. Boundaries are about you. So a lot of times we feel guilty for putting up a boundary, or it just feels icky.
Yeah.
Some people might say cringe because how it's feeling, because it feels like when I place this boundary, I'm placing it on you. But what I'm actually doing is I'm placing the boundary for myself of how I'm going to respond or what I'm going to allow in response to me. It's like a fence, right? You put up a fence. I'm not putting up a concrete wall that has no doors. Putting up a fence that has a gate that I can choose when to open the gate or not. I can choose what to let in, what to push out. That's how you see boundaries. Boundaries are meant to protect what's inside and keep the things that are detrimental to your balance outside. So when you start
Amazing.
thinking of it that way, the guilt kind of dissipates a little bit more.
I love it. And Tara, this is something I'm going to take away in my own life for sure. So thank you.
Yeah.
And what does it mean to be a balanced badass? And how can someone really achieve it?
I think it is something that you are constantly working towards. If you are a true badass, you're wanting to always grow and change and learn. Being a balanced badass to me is about honoring what's important to you, honoring your values, honoring your energy, and doing it without losing yourself in the process. And I think that the reason why I kind of came up with the, whatever you want to call it, the motto of being a balanced badass is because like, I want people to see the confidence that I feel and the energy that kind of surrounds that, because I know who I am. I know what's important to me, and I am living up to that. And that is to me, a balanced badass is living in integrity with who they are and what's important to them and what they find value in. And that is in life, in work, at play, whatever that looks like for you. And it changes, it ebbs and flows. I just talked about, like, we have seasons of life where things are going to be more important than others. And that's okay. Like, that's part of it. Like, there are going to be times in your life where your career is not first and foremost, and it shouldn't be. There are going to be times in your life where family is going to come first, but also there's going to be times where your career may come first. And that's okay. That's recognizing it. What happens when you get out of balance is when you start fighting that, when you start going against the grain and going against kind of where you need to be and trying to put your energy somewhere where it does not need to be in that moment. That's where you don't, that you stray away from the balance badass piece. That to me is just really what it's all about, is just honoring who you are, knowing who you are, and being confident in.
Amazing, Tara. Thank you. And I heard in one of your YouTube videos, you also mentioned a 4 burners theory to explain the work-life balance. If you don't mind sharing that as well, I really like that.
So it's almost similar to kind of like the gymnast image, but if you picture a stovetop and you have 4 burners on the stovetop, and I'm picturing a gas stovetop. Some people have electric, but we're going to go with gas for this. Okay. If you turn all 4 burners on high, eventually you may run out of gas, or everything's going to burn and you're not going to have a good meal. Sometimes things need to be cooked at medium high temperature. Some things need to just be on a simmer. Sometimes you're just letting it sit, not with the burner on. It's just sitting there waiting because you've already taken care of it. Your life is the same way. So if you picture your 4 burners like work, you have kind of relationships, you have your social friend group, you know, whatever facets of life, if you think of like your wheel of life, whatever 4 quadrants are most important to you, you're not going to have those burners on high at all times and be able to sustain that. So that's what kind of the 4 burners theory is about, is thinking about where do you need to adjust the temperature to make sure that everything cooks at the same time, that everything's taken care of, and that you don't burn everything that's on the burners. So that's kind of another way to just picture it.
I love it. Amazing. And actually with work-life balance, it's also important to prioritize and say no to people. So what's the advice on how can we really say no to someone without feeling guilty or hurting someone's feeling?
Yeah. I think the biggest thing here is to recognize that you are saying no because you need to say yes to something else. And, you know, we've all heard that saying, like, every no is an opportunity for a yes, or every time you say yes, then you're taking away another yes from another thing that's more important to you. Saying no is hard, especially at work, in your personal life.
Yeah.
But it all comes down to recognizing, like, why you're saying no. Are you saying no because you don't want to? Are you saying no to avoid something? Are you saying no because you don't have the capacity, you don't have the energy, you don't have the talent for it? And the way that I have kind of come out of this guilt is by understanding why. Because, like, if I'm saying no because I'm avoiding something, that's usually when I feel guilty. And so then I'm like, have a real talk with myself, like, okay, I just need to talk to this person about why I'm avoiding it in the first place. If I'm saying no because I genuinely don't think I'm the best suited for this task or this request, or I just know I can't give my all to it and that at that time, then I see it more as doing a disservice to that individual by saying yes. And so actually I start to see no's as gifts, because if you frame it like a gift, like, I'm saying no, it may seem not like a gift right now, but it's a gift because I'm not causing you trouble in the long run, or I'm gifting the opportunity to someone else that may be a better fit, may be better suited. And I'm also gifting myself the respect of my boundaries, the respect of my capacity, of my energy and the
Mm-hmm.
opportunity to say yes to something that's more in line with my core self. So helping that, like that helps. And then I also find practice saying no on low stakes things. Like the more you can practice it, the more comfortable you get with it. And you don't have to be like, no, like just flat out no. Although I am like that now.
Mm-hmm.
But like you don't have to be. You can say I don't have capacity for that right now. Or this isn't in line with my goals at the moment. Come back at another time. Another thing too
Mm-hmm.
is you don't have to give a reason for your no.
Mm.
I think a lot of us spiral because of the people
That's
pleasing
huge.
and the
Yeah.
guilt that we're like, no, because this, and this.
Mm-hmm.
Stop that. Because what you're doing is giving an opportunity for that person to keep
Mm-hmm.
asking and to keep trying. And that's when you're going to feel even guiltier for saying no. So it's better to just say no in whatever way you feel
Mm.
comfortable saying no and leave it at that. You do not have to qualify
Verstehe.
your no.
Amazing. That's another takeaway, Tara, for sure. And last question before we wrap up. So, what's your advice on how organizations can create culture which is productive and burnout resistant?
Yeah. So, my biggest recommendation here, and it sounds so simple, but it's not always simple, but it's to put your people at the center of
Mm-hmm.
your focus. If you can focus on the well-being of your people, then
Mm-hmm.
your people will focus on the well-being of the organization and your company. And that is ultimately how you can really create change and create a difference within your employees, within your culture.
Mm-hmm.
I have several methods that I use. The 5 C's are a great way, not just for individuals to examine, but for organizations to examine as well, especially when it comes to like policies and
Mm-hmm.
practices and standard operating procedures. Like what little nuances exist
Mm-hmm.
that may be fueling the burnout of our employees, and how can we fix that? It's also important, I think, for companies and organizations to look at
Mm-hmm.
how they're addressing it from a
Mm-hmm.
systemic perspective. I talk a lot about this, like well-being programs are great. We shouldn't get rid of them. But if we're not addressing the systemic issues, then they're really just like token band-aids on a bigger issue.
Mm-hmm.
And they're doing essentially more of a disservice than they would be doing a service for your employees. Imagine the impact you could have by
Mm-hmm.
providing wellness programs, well-being programs when they're tagged onto a company that is really putting their people first. Something that someone told me early in my career that I have held on to up until this point, so for 15
Mm-hmm.
plus years, is that if you are leading a team, your goal is to make sure that your people know and are known. So what that means is that they know that they are cared for,
Mm-hmm.
that they are valued, that they know the contribution that they're giving, that they know the information they need to know, that there's transparent communication, that they understand what's going on from a leadership level,
Mm-hmm.
and that they're known so that you know their strengths, you know who they are, you value who they are, and you value what they bring to the table. When you focus on those two things, things fall into place very easily and
Mm-hmm.
you create a thriving culture. Is it easy to always do that? No, not in our society. But I think with the right tools, with the right support, there are opportunities to create a burnout resistant workplace that puts the people at the center, and therefore
Mm-hmm.
your profits and your products can rise to the occasion as well.
Wow. Thank you so much, Sarah. What an incredible conversation we had today.
Yeah.
Have so many takeaways. Wow. Thank you so much, Sarah. I thoroughly enjoyed. And
I loved it.
thank you. Same here. So for our listeners, if you enjoyed the episode, make sure you follow and leave us a review because that will help me get more interesting guests like Tara on this show. And don't forget to see the show notes because I link Tara's social media handles, website, and a newsletter, which I have subscribed and I thoroughly enjoy reading because there's lots of burnout tips in it for sure. And if you're listening to this on YouTube, make sure you like and subscribe and comment below what's your biggest takeaway from this episode. So thank you everyone for listening. Thank you, Tara, once again. It's been an honor to really talk to you this evening. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sid.
Thank you.